In the interest of time, maybe what I'll start doing is introduce myself and introduce our panel. We can at least start with some introductions of the panelists we have here in person while we work to get Representative Baum and Representative Schultz on the screen so you can see them and they can participate as well. Good morning. My name is Kathy Grismeyer. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the City of Boise, and we are really excited to see all of you here today for day 2 of the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Summit. I'm really excited about today's conversation with local elected officials from throughout the Greater Northwest to really talk about the legislative collaboration happening in their states, maybe across state lines, to really look at advancing passenger rail opportunities here throughout our region. As somebody who does government affairs, it's my job to work with elected officials to try and advance issues of importance to residents of the city of Boise, and passenger rail is a really exciting one. And so I'm really looking forward to just learning more about what's happening in other states. We have a lawmaker here from Idaho that we worked very closely with, talking about what we're doing here in Idaho to help advance passenger rail. And so I think it'll be a really exciting and informative conversation. So I'm going to start first. We have, like I said, 2 folks from online, a representative from Utah and a representative from Montana. But I'm going to start first with some quick bios for our folks here. And I am not as tall as Stephen Gardner, so I really need to adjust this microphone. Here to my left, our first lawmaker, we have Representative Dustin Manwaring, who represents Pocatello, Idaho in District 29. He was raised in Blackfoot, Idaho, over in Eastern Idaho, practices law in his city, focused on business and intellectual property. He has strong Idaho roots, returning to the Gem State after attending his undergraduate school at the University of Utah and law school at Drake University in Iowa. During law school, Representative Manwaring served as a law clerk for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Iowa. And prior to that, he worked as a manager for Utah-based SkyWest Airlines in Salt Lake City. He was re-elected to the Idaho House of Representatives for a second term in 2020, and currently was elected as the Majority Caucus Chair by his colleagues. So please join me in welcoming Representative Manwaring. Next, we have Representative Jake Fye from Tacoma, Washington, who is a veteran panelist of this conference. So just a thank you to him. I think this is his 4th panel presentation of the week. So he gets like the always says yes, super committed to this topic award for the conference. He was born and raised in Port Angeles in the northwest corner of Washington State and currently serves the city of Tacoma. He was the first in his family to graduate from college, earning a BA in political science from the University of Washington and then an MPA from the University of Puget Sound. He's done a lot in the energy space, having served as the director of the WSU Energy Program, was an energy services manager for Tacoma Power, and has served on the Tacoma City Council. He was elected to the Washington House of Representatives in 2012 and currently serves as chair of the House Transportation Committee. Please join me in welcoming him to the panel. Next, we have Senator Chris Gorsuch from Gresham, Oregon, representing District 25. He started his work life as a Portland police officer and then left the Bureau to return to school, eventually earning a PhD in urban studies from Portland State University. I will add that I just realized he's also a University of Oregon Duck alum, so go Ducks, go. And as an educator, he teaches both geography and criminal justice. He has served as a Troutdale City Councilor and as an Oregon State Representative, where he has served as Vice Chair of the House Transportation Committee and is now Co-Chair of the Joint Committee on Transportation. Please join me in welcoming Senator Gorsuch. And then not to be left out, we have our 2 virtual attendants. So we have Representative Mike Schultz representing Hooper, Utah from District 12. He is a lifelong resident of Hooper, Utah, and was elected to House District 12 in 2015. He currently serves as the House Majority Leader. He owns and operates a number of small businesses, including his home building company, Castle Creek Homes. Please join me in welcoming Representative Schultz. And then finally, from the great state of Montana, we have Representative Denise Baum from Billings, Montana, representing District 47. She is a freshman Montana legislator, having completed her first legislative in 2023. Congratulations. During the legislative sessions, she serves on the State Administration and Veterans Affairs Committee, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and Transportation Committee, and currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Transportation Interim Committee. She's a lifelong public servant with over 30 years in law enforcement, serving the last 20 years with the City of Billings Police Department, where she currently is employed as a detective. Please join me in welcoming her as well. Okay, Right on time, 10 minutes for introductions and we're going to get going. So today's panel conversation, as I mentioned, is really meant to kind of open our eyes to what sort of legislative conversations are happening here throughout the greater Northwest as it pertains to passenger rail, and what is sort of the conversation, the political conversations, what's the political will like. We have a variety of states here, states like Idaho that are just getting started and re-entering the conversation, and then states who definitely have established train service. And so maybe to help just sort of set the base tone for today's conversation, my first question to our panelists, and I'm going to start with our online virtual attendees, if that works, is if you could help kind of better help the audience better understand the lay of the land regarding passenger rail in your home state. If you could just kind of talk about what does current train service look like in your state. And if we could start with Representative Schultz.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine and see you too. Go ahead.
Oh, perfect. Great. Well, thanks. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today virtually. I'm at a rodeo with my daughter, and so I found a nice shade tree to sit under. So anyways, I appreciate the opportunity. So in Utah, our structure may be a little bit different than most states. We have a great transit operator at UTA, Utah Transit Authority. It's mostly ran by the local governments and funded by the local governments. We do have a commuter rail. It's called Front Runner, and it runs all the way along the Wasatch Front from Provo clear to Ogden, which encompasses about 83 miles of rail line, and it operates 6 days a week with 30-minute services during peak times. We also have light rail throughout the Salt Lake downtown area and Salt Lake Valley. It has about 45 miles of light rail and about 50 miles about 50 stations. It offers convenient connections throughout Salt Lake, including the Salt Lake Airport and down to downtown Salt Lake. One of our big goals that we would like to see is trying to figure out a way to get service clear up to the ski resorts, so you're able to get off of the airport and onto a rail line, and then take transit all the way to some of the ski resorts during the summer and the winter. So.
Great. Thank you, Representative Schultz. Representative Baum, if you'd like to go next.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this panel, also virtually. Very honored. Currently in Montana, we have the existing Empire Builder line that runs across the High Line, which is the northern part of the state. There's 12 stops with continued service from Williston, North Dakota, all the way over to the left. Due to the proximity to Glacier National Park.
Oh no, Representative Baum, you keep cutting out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think we have you back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do I need to restart or?
No, I think you're good. Go for it.
Okay, go for it. All right, so the North Coast Hiawatha route, the southern route that we're looking to reestablish, was discontinued in Montana 40.
Hey, Representative Baum, might you try turning off your camera? I wonder if this streaming, we might be able to just hear you with the camera turned off. Okay, maybe while that gets figured out, the joys of both virtual and in person. Representative Manring, would you like to answer this question, kind of current state of passenger rail in Idaho? And I don't mean that to be a trick question to you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Idaho is a little different. I don't think it's a surprise to any of you. We have a great history of passenger rail, especially through southern Idaho and then up through McCall from here. But there's a great deficit now for several decades. And so we are a little bit different than our surrounding states with current passenger rail service. Other than that Empire Builder route that goes through Montana, over into Washington. That's about it as far as we have passenger rail service in Idaho right now. So the focus right now is sort of, if you build it, will they come back? And I think we have great passion and energy and focus. And I look at the group in this room and those that have been working on this issue in Idaho. I think we have new pioneers, hopefully, to get this route restored. And so the current state is a lot of effort and a lot of coalition building, and we'll talk some more about that. But we hope to restore passenger rail service back to Idaho.
Great, thank you. Representative Phi. And if you could speak directly into the mic so the virtual attendees can hear too.
Sure. So we probably have the most of passenger rail in the region. Obviously, people I think are familiar with the Amtrak Cascades service that is primarily in terms of volume of trains between Portland and Seattle, but also now back up to Vancouver, BC, and down to Eugene, Oregon. Of course, there's the Coast Starlight that goes all the way down to Los Angeles. Sometimes gets forgotten in the mix is that our regional transit authority, Sound Transit, offers basically work hour service between Lakewood and Pierce County, all the way up to Everett. So that is additional service that's run through the regional transit authority. I'll just mention, it's a challenging thing with respect to ridership. We had that unfortunate crash at Mounts Road in Pierce County, and then we had the pandemic, and we're just, we're in a process of building, and I think there's been a great response in terms of ridership, but we've had our years of difficulty, like Amtrak had their years of difficulty. But we've just instituted, as I mentioned, I think in one of the other previous panels, a program where we're utilizing money from our carbon funding or carbon offset funding to provide free ridership for young people under 18 to sort of rebuild the interest in ridership among the next generation of potential riders.
Great, thank you. Senator, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. In my state of Oregon, we have basically two systems right now. As was just mentioned, Amtrak Cascades, which has now, I think, been fully restored to its pre-pandemic schedule, which is a very good thing. The other thing is it just added a nonstop train. I say nonstop, but a train that does not require you to stay overnight in Seattle from Portland if you're going to Vancouver, BC. So that's a huge improvement for us. The other one, of course, is what Representative Fay just alluded to, the Coast Starlight. And the Coast Starlight is a long-term train. It is a long-distance train, and it has very high ridership, generally speaking. And Amtrak Cascades, the ridership has been increasing substantially as well. We have some pieces of the system that are missing, which we've been talking about for a while. The Pioneer, which has been gone for over 20 years, that used to serve northeastern Oregon and on through Boise and on out to Chicago. And I hope that we'll be able to reestablish that. The other piece that we have is light rail. And so in the city of Portland, we have both light rail and trolleys. Trolleys are kind of nostalgic and slow, and probably more for tourists than anything else. MAX would be a better system if it was faster. In the right-of-way, where it has its own right-of-way, which is usually along the freeway corridors, it's very competitive in terms of competing with car travel times. But as soon as you get into, say, Lloyd Center and into downtown Portland, it shares the streets and it gets very slow. So one of the things to we've been thinking about and talking about for a long time. It's the need to have some sort of way to go through the central core, whether it's go up, a story or go down a story, to get off of the surface, because being on the surface really hinders the ability for people from my part of the metropolitan area out in Gresham, Troutdale, out east, to commute over to the west side where a lot of jobs are located in Beaverton, Hillsborough. We also have an old bridge and it's Union Pacific's bridge, the steel bridge, which is also problematic in the long term. So there are some things that we can do for local transit, rail, as well as hopefully improving the state system.
Great. Thank you. There's definitely a diversity of sort of the establishment of rail and kind of across the region. And so, as somebody who's working very closely with Representative Manwaring and other Idaho leaders here in the state, I'm really curious to hear kind of what were the conversations in some of the other states, and for Representative Manwaring, kind of like, what are we discussing at this point right now in Idaho? But what conversations were happening inside your state houses to really look at either revitalizing or increasing investment in your passenger rail network? How are you bringing folks to the table? How are you convincing your colleagues that it's a worthwhile investment? There's a lot of competing budgetary interests at the state level, I'm sure. And so I would be very interested to hear kind of how those conversations are happening in your state. And so I'll start with our virtual folks again. Representative Schultz, if you'd like to kick us off.
Oh, hey, okay. Hey, well, thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, in Utah, I really have to give credit for the previous work that's been done to our local governments. They're the ones that really came together. The legislature provided an opportunity for the local governments to impose a small portion sales tax on their communities, and then dedicate those funds to transit. Most of our local governments and counties did that along the Wasatch Front. I'm going to say about 6 or 7 years ago, we recognized at the state level probably a bigger need in order for us to come together to think bigger and more regionally, especially with the growth that Utah has experienced. And so the state has started to step in over the last several years to increase funding and probably more importantly, figure out a way, how can we integrate our rail system and our future rail system with our freeways and our highway system. And so that's where we're currently at with the state legislature and the state entities. We're very fortunate in Utah to have a road department, UDOT, that is very supportive of transit. We know looking forward with our growth that we cannot build enough roads to meet the needs of our growth. And so while transit may not be as important today, we know that given 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, because of our growth, that transit is going to have to become a more important role in how we move people across Utah.
Great. Thank you, Representative. Representative Baum.
You able to hear me okay this time?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. And I keep cutting out, so if I disappear, I apologize. I don't know what's wrong with the connection. 1990s, the Montana legislature voted to allow counties to create their own rail authorities. Initially intended to allow, small.
Oh, no. Oh, Representative Baum, we're struggling to hear you again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, apparently there's
Shoot. Let's try going back to our in-person attendees, and then we'll see if we can't try Representative Baum one last time. Representative Manwaring.
So the initial conversations for me started about a year and a half ago. I know obviously there's been a lot of effort here, even going back before that in Idaho. And I remember an initial conversation, and Kathy came into my office in the State House, and she sat down and she said, there's some interest at the city of Boise, and with council member Elaine Clegg at the time. And I was at a really weak low point. I just come back from New Zealand and ridden their trains all over New Zealand. And so I was just had a soft place in my heart for training at the time. But I was thinking, if Idaho had a north-south train through Idaho, it'd be one of the most scenic, beautiful routes in the United States. And I also come from a railroad town. I represent Pocatello and District 29 in Southeast Idaho. And that's a railroad town going back to the late 1800s. And that's fundamentally who we are. And I remember that. And like we talked about this morning, I mean, everybody has that story about the railroad. And so we just initiated that conversation. But fast forwarding to kind of how some of those conversations have gone in the State House, it really does go back to that question about growth that Representative Schultz was talking about. That's something in Idaho and obviously in Utah in particular that we're keenly aware of. And if you ask any citizen out on the street, it's usually one of the first things of topic of conversation is how much growth we're seeing and the impacts you see to housing and the economies around Idaho. So that's something that perks up ears in the State House, and how we're going to deal with that those ongoing transportation and infrastructure issues in our state. We're looking at adding, highway lane miles and third lanes between communities. I would have never dreamed of doing so just 5 or 10 years ago. And so we really are interested in what we're going to do to help with capacity in Idaho. So that's where those conversations are going. And we've started to hone in on, over the last year, how do we build out conversations between state and local officials, and also then join in with sort of our regional colleagues in the Intermountain West, so that we can start to have these conversations to build out future transit service going into the next several decades.
Great. Thank you. Representative Fay.
Yeah, so it's interesting in my mind about the differences, the different topics that cut across passenger rail and dealing with growth. We're in a context of right now of the highest level by far of road construction that the state of Washington's ever had, with competition for contractors and competition for labor, and actually, quite frankly, the federal bipartisan infrastructure effort doesn't help us in terms of costs, because there's a competition for the limited amount of labor and the limited amount of contractors to do the work. But there is, at a more subdued level, I call it, controversy over whether what the future is going to be for heavy passenger rail, whether it's going to be ultra high speed rail, or whether we're going to make enhancements to the Amtrak Cascades route, and with, I'd say, spirited and strong differences of opinion about what the best solution is. In addition to that, there is, among the advocates certainly, and some legislators, interest in providing more service into Eastern Washington. We did a study about that a few years ago. And then in the metropolitan area of King, Pierce, and Snohomish County, great interest in seeing light rail come to many communities that hasn't yet reached, whether it's the east side of King County, or whether it's north into Everett, or south into Tacoma. So a lot of things going on, but it's in the context of a lot of other stuff happening in the transportation field.
Great, thank you. Senator?
Thank you. One of the things that I found, I've been advocating for improved rail service since I first entered the legislature, and that was back in 2013. Having moved to the Senate, I was able to move up to the co-chair position of joint transportation. So over time, we've gotten a little more of a voice in the state of Oregon. And many of you that know how political systems work know that sometimes it takes a while for people to build up their seniority and therefore have some more influence than they do when they first arrived. We actually have a problem that I think Representative Fay can identify with, which is we cannot use federal highway dollars for rail. Now, I would argue that when you put in a rail line, it helps the highway in terms of congestion, but that's not something the federal government agrees with. So we have to find other ways to try and finance things. And unfortunately, that means in the state of Oregon that we have to kind of duct tape things together and maybe a little chewing gum. But we had a bill that we passed this past session, Senate Bill 16. And we worked very, very closely with the lobbyists from the Union Pacific and also the lobbyists for the short lines in the state, especially Portland and Western. And basically, it expanded the ability of what the state can do to help rail lines. So Senate Bill 16 added on to a bill from 1985. That bill was designed to help with rail lines, rehabilitate rail properties, purchase rail lines, planning for rail activities. What Senate Bill 16 does is it says that we can also now assist with issues around rail capacity, and that includes things like railroad sidings. The problem, of course, is still funding. Now, in Oregon, we have this thing called Connect Oregon, and it's a one way when it gets funded to get some money for railroads. And we've seen some recent successes with certain railroads getting some funding. But I think the biggest problem is with Connect Oregon that rail has to compete with electric vehicles. And so it's personally, I would disconnect those two and have each one go on its own merits. I understand the importance of EVs and electrification, but unfortunately that, we're pitting what I would consider to be one environmentally friendly way to move people around with another or against another. So it's going to be a long-term situation. There are a lot of high-speed advocates in the state of Oregon, but there are a lot of folks, including myself and Representative Nathanson, who's my co-chair on the Rail Caucus, who worry about what happens to the Willamette Valley. It's very unlikely that high-speed pencils out to go from Portland down to Eugene. But it could be improved, which we were talking about. And in fact, in certain European contexts, that's what they've done, where it may not work to run a high-speed system all the way from point A to point B, but you can do some improvements, maybe from B to C, that improve things and then help tie into the high-speed system. We're just concerned that we're going to get left behind or perhaps derailed, if you will.
We should be keeping like a little tally of all the best rail and train funds. There are some like really brilliant, talking points we could be putting together. I really liked what you were saying, Senator Gorsuch, about kind of working with the train lobbyists, with the freight lobbyists, which I was definitely taking notes, always on the job, government affairs person here, thinking about how do we keep these conversations going. But you kind of dovetailed into my next question, which is, there are barriers. There's obviously a lot of enthusiasm for passenger rail. There's a lot of excitement with the federal investments that are coming through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And I think, we see a lot of like political interest. The public seems to really like trains. Everyone has a good train story, but there are still barriers. So maybe as we're here in this room together, I want to pivot, not to like bring the mood down and talk about sad things, but also I think, helpful to better understand what are some of the barriers we're facing in our region and even in states where there is already investment and access and service as a way to sort of collaboratively troubleshoot together. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and maybe hope we're going to start with Representative Baum, maybe third time's the charm, but if you could speak a little bit to maybe some barriers you all are facing in Montana, and then we'll jump to Representative Schultz. Oh, Great, she's texting. I don't see a response. Okay, maybe I'll jump to Representative Schultz. If Representative Baum, you want to chat us your answer to that question and I can read it. We'll try and find a way to make sure that you continue to stay engaged in the conversation. So let's start with Representative Schultz. Oh, we heard you, Representative Baum.
Yes,
Oh, we're so sorry, Representative Baum. Technology is not our friend today.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, yeah. Representative Baum, thank you, Representative Manwaring. I don't know if you have like a link to join by phone. Maybe you could try that as opposed to the video and see if we can't get you included that way, because we certainly want to make sure we have Montana included.
okay.
In interim, let's jump to Representative Schultz.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Well, there's certainly a lot of different barriers in Utah that we're trying to work through. You know, one is always the politics. You know, not everybody is super supportive of transit. You know, with Utah being a fairly conservative state, that's one of the barriers that we have to overcome. A lot of people don't see and understand the vision because you know, there's a fair argument to be made. Do we need rail service in the state of Utah, passenger rail service in the state of Utah right now? Certainly in a lot of the areas that we have current rail service, we do, but there's some areas where ridership numbers are down significantly because it's still faster to take, hop in your vehicle and hit the roads. But that is very quickly becoming less and less of an option. In Utah, you know, when I first became chair of transportation in 2017, and one of the things I'll never forget was our road department sitting me down and saying, Representative, one of the biggest things we're going to face in Utah is our growth, and we will not meet the needs of transportation with just roads. And so we like to think that we try to get ahead of things in Utah. And so that's really what we have been focused on trying to do, is get ahead of what the needs are and think ahead before we come to a point to where we hit gridlock and our quality of life significantly suffers. And so trying to build the political will to look ahead in the future is certainly one of the biggest challenges that we have, and will continue to be those challenges until people are just stuck on the freeways, and we don't want to see that happen. So another thing that's been maybe a little bit frustrating from my perspective is the overregulation from the federal government. You know, we have a great company in Utah called Stadler Rail. They build rail lines all over the world. They build passenger rail lines and rail cars all over the world. They moved to Utah 4 or 5 years ago, and they're building rail cars. When they talk about some of the regulations in other countries such as Switzerland or Europe or Asia, and we compare those to the regulations that are forced on us by the federal government, it's really frustrating what it does to our costs. Because we could build rail lines and build more passenger rail lines for significantly less cost if we could get the federal government out of the way and be able to do it what makes the most sense. We certainly appreciate the funding that we do get from the Federal Transit Administration, but man, there's a lot of regulation that comes along with that that increases the cost, which becomes very prohibitive in many circumstances. So great question.
Thank you very much, Representative. Okay, Representative Baum, I'm gonna really keep my fingers crossed that this works. And Representative Baum, if you're speaking, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay,
Go
I
ahead.
missed part of the other representative's response because I was trying to log into this other link.
We're talking about barriers that folks might be facing in Montana in continuing to revitalize and restore passenger rail service.
Okay. So currently, just trying to, as I said, get the counties on the proposed route on board, moving the conversation forward from a previous session, looking at what we can do versus this isn't possible. A lot of outreach to get some of the counties that are not part of the Big Sky Rail Authority, basically on board. There you go. As signing on to the joint resolution, which was part of my answer that unfortunately you were not able to hear me on. So the Big Sky Rail Passenger Authority is what was established due to previous legislation that allowed counties to develop their own rail authorities. And they could also do it by doing a combination of 2 or more counties to do a regional authority. And under this plan, we're trying to get the additional, I think there's 6 counties that need to sign on yet to help move this plan going forward as far as reestablishing the Southern Line.
Great. Thank you. And we heard you. So that's so exciting.
Okay.
I want
Well,
to
I had all my great answers ready to
Yes.
go.
Representative Manwaring, what barriers are we facing here in Idaho?
Well, I think with this initial conversation that we've had and now continuing into the second, at least the second year for me, it's cost and complexity, right? I mean, this is a multi-government, multi-state, multi-party issue. And when you're talking about restoring something like long distant routes like the Pioneer route, we can't do it alone. And so even when you're talking to, for me, if I'm talking to a colleague at the State House, it's much bigger than that, right? And so to be able to take on that complexity, I think is really the complication when you're talking about a barrier. That's what it is. And immediately in Idaho, the question goes, okay, well, how are we going to pay for that? Right. And so that's just as plain and simple as you can get of the barrier that we're facing in those conversations. And I think we have some practical things to deal with that we can make some progress on. We don't have a lot of state dedicated resources. I think ITD has limited staff support for that and a statewide rail plan. There are things that we can do to help support that, but those are barriers. And we're talking about, now I think we've lost a generation with that knowledge of what rail service in Idaho looks like. And so we're going to have some time to build that up. Just because we haven't seen it for several decades now. So that's a barrier to kind of get people back invigorated and involved and to understand what rail service looks like in Idaho.
Great. Thank you, Representative.
Well, I'm going to echo some of the comments that Representative Manwaring and Senator Gorsuch has expressed. You've got competition for attention in terms of transportation. You've got competition and limitations on funding sources. We could only go 2 places, and we previously only could go 1 place, which is our multimodal account, to pay for active transportation, transit, rail. And actually, some of the highway interests want to use some of that money to build highways. So you've got this competing challenge for the dollars and what we call multimodal, which comes basically from vehicle fees. And then now we have a new funding source, which is related to reducing carbon, but you still have a competition with transit, active transportation, efforts to reduce carbon emissions in a whole assortment of different ways in the transportation sector. So it makes it difficult to try to find balance, right? And you have to take a look at where you're going to get the best bang for the dollar. And sometimes with something like passenger rail, especially if it's something new, there's a lot more uncertainty about what the demand for that service is going to be. And so it makes it less competitive on the basis of that uncertainty.
Thank you. Senator?
Well, I think part of the problem too is that we face historical inertia. So when you talk to a lot of folks, certainly I can speak to ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation. When you speak to them, I think they're still in the mode of, oh, sorry, we don't have any money. And the thing that even some on the commission, we have a commission that sets the overall state policy and then ODOT carries it forward. And sometimes listens to the legislature, sometimes. But what we hear is, yeah, there's no money. What they're not paying attention to is all of the federal infrastructure money that's being offered. And so one of the challenges for those of us that are interested in expanding rail, like the Pioneer, is to keep pointing out that we don't have to, at the state level, necessarily pay for this, that there's federal money that can enhance sidings, can enhance getting rid of, grade crossings, things of that nature. And so that's one of the things that we face. The other thing is, since we don't have a lot of money in the first place at the state level for rail funding, there isn't a very large ODOT rail program. Now, they do what they can with what they have. Personally, what I would like to see is that we would have a way to pump more money in and have a state rail authority that operated all by itself without ODOT, because they really are two different things. But when we focus on the freeways, there was this interesting article that was in King 5 News out of Seattle recently, and they were talking about what would it cost to add one lane of freeway each way on Interstate 5 between Portland and Vancouver, BC. Do you know what the estimate was? About $110 billion. Now, if you were to try and build a high-speed system, the estimate is that it's less than half. It's about 40 billion. Now, of course, those are estimates and things change, and then inflation comes along, and yeah.
Fly closer to 100.
Right. But the idea is, if you could build, let's say it's comparable, let's say it's 100 and 100, it would make more sense in the long run to go with the rail side. So especially with the federal offerings, I think it's really something that we have to get away from some of the old school thinking. That's something that I think also we need to be a little more creative. Look at all the land that we have along freeways in the states out west. Driving down to Salem every day from Gresham, and I'm on I-5, and you're on this big long stretch, and there's these huge shoulders. And it's like, well, we're not doing anything with those. What if we contracted out to companies that wanted to do solar panels, that wanted to generate electricity, and we don't manage them? We let a private company manage them. And we took those resources and put them into, say, a rail program. It's just one of, I think, many ways that we could think differently. Although I'd like to see a rail line right down Interstate 5. Right down it. But, that's me. Thank you.
I want to be mindful of time. We have about 10 minutes left, and I forgot to plan for question and answers. I assume that there are some questions out in the audience. Okay, so I'm going to ask one final question of our panelists before we move into a Q&A, which is, knowing we have, so many legislators from across both parties here on today's panel, and we're really talking about regional rail at today's conference. I think my last question for this group is, how can states continue or endeavor to work together to really advance passenger rail? I know there's a panel later today on interstate rail compact, and certainly there are some formal ways to do that, but either from your experience or what you'd like to see improved in the region, how would you like to see states work together to address passenger rail needs? So we'll start with you, Representative Schultz.
Oh, thank you. It's a great question. I think it's certainly a conversation that needs to be had, and we're, in Utah, we're certainly excited to work with our surrounding states. I think from our perspective, I think some of the things that would have the most interest uh, would be, some sort of a passenger rail line from Boise to Salt Lake and from Salt Lake to Vegas. And then certainly, there'd be multiple stops along the way. The one from Salt Lake to Vegas really would benefit the southern part of Utah. But boy, I think, one going uh, from Boise to Salt Lake or Salt Lake to Boise surely could have a really huge economic impact for the state of Utah. So I think there's a lot of really interesting discussions that's starting to be kicked off at the federal level about what that looks like and is it possible? And I think Utah is certainly willing to engage in that and excited to engage in that conversation.
Great, thank you. And we seem to have lost Representative Baum, which we're sorry to have missed her, and that technology wasn't on our side today. Representative Manwaring.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing we can do is to build transportation relationships between our states. So all things transportation are going to benefit ultimately rail and other objectives that we're trying to get at. I mean, in particular, and I heard it discussed yesterday, but we can't miss those opportunities to build those relationships with our freight operators, with the host railroads, with the intermodal guys, and building out sidings and building in those, grade crossing improvements. I mean, everything that we're doing and learning best practices and building relationships between the Intermountain West to show that we can do this and we can have long-term partnerships is gonna help benefit rail going into the future. So, I mean, I think we have to keep that higher, broader perspective and not get into the minutiae sometimes. Yes, we have to focus on those details, but to show that we are able to work together and to do all things transportation really, really well or better than everybody else, because we are competing for those dollars. And if we can do that in the Western United States, we will have a state-of-the-art transportation system.
So I'm gonna step outside of rail and tell you about the value of cooperation among states. Back when I first entered the legislature in 2013, our Senate turned down federal money to help build the interstate bridge across the Columbia River between Vancouver and Portland. And it's taken quite a while.
Yes.
But we have worked very much. In fact, my counterpart, Senator Leas and I and Representative McLean and Representative Gorsuch have met and are working towards, and we both now passed the state funding that'll be necessary to attract the federal money to rebuild that bridge. So the relationships matter, and I think that's probably the best example that I'm aware of how we've worked together to make a project of mutual interest happen. And that ought to be the start. How many bridges do we have between Oregon and Washington along the Columbia River that need to be replaced? So it's more than just rail. But I think that's, as a politician, legislator in one state with adjoining states, that's our obligation to do that. And that's why the work that Penmar does is so great, that it facilitates that, whether it's with provinces or whether it's with other states. Those relationships have to be worked on and nurtured and developed over many, many years in order to successfully bring in that outside federal money, whether it's Canadian money or whether it's American money, but it's a value that will pay off for all of our constituents.
Great, thank you.
The interstate bridge is an interesting story, and we could talk for hours about that. Just remember, though, when you go at it a second time, you have to change the name of the project. Right. But at any rate, the one thing I will say is that if you look at Amtrak Cascades, I think that WashDOT and ODOT do a really good job of cooperating and working together on that particular system. The problem that I see with ODOT is, as I said before, is that we're thinking in the old school way of limited funds. But The other thing to remember is that none of this is monolithic. We kind of touched on this yesterday. State government is not monolithic. There's differences between legislators. There's differences between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And so there's a lot of things that we have to navigate. As you were saying, Representative Manwaring, we really have a lot of different pieces to look at in terms of all of this. The one thing that I found, for instance, with the Pioneer exercise is that my DOT is not terribly excited about advocating. And so our rail caucus had to get out there and work to let the federal government know that there are many of us on the western end of that proposed reinvigorated line that want it. Unfortunately, I think ODOT made it look like Boise to Salt Lake was the only sections interested, and that's not true. And we had to essentially be our own lobbyists. And so we went, and I think we had, depending upon whether it was a chamber person, a local government official, state legislators, I think Metro in Portland also, and we had about 27 signatories on a letter to the federal government to say, no, this is important for us. And so sometimes you can't wait for the state apparatus to do it sometimes. And no offense to ODOT, I mean, they have their constraints, but you have to go out there as leaders in the community and say, okay, we have a different view, and we're not just going to leave it up to the state, because there's different ideas within each of these states. I think, though, in closing, that we need a strong Western, especially Northwestern coalition of states to work together, whether it's a compact or something else, where we can compete better with places like the Northeast Corridor. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience. And so if you want to stand up, I can hear pretty well, and then I'll repeat it into the microphone and we'll go from there. Yeah, a question for those who maybe didn't hear. How are we continuing to build momentum, build excitement, engage sort of a younger workforce generation to be engaged in rail? I think Representative Manwaring talked about, at least here in Idaho, we've lost a couple of generations, just haven't even seen train service, what that looks like. So a question for the panelists.
I would argue that some of that's already there. If you look at the fact that there are now people, younger people that are not even driving. And there's a lot of younger people, not exclusively, I'm old and I care, but there's a lot of concern about the environment. There's a lot of concern among younger people regarding climate change. And I think that's one thing that we can continue to do, is work with the environmental communities to really communicate how important rail, bus, bicycles, all of those things are in helping to mitigate some of those things. So I think the potential is there, but we need a stronger coalition, I think, with environmental groups for sure.
I'll just make a couple of brief comments. I mean, I think these transportation systems, and in particular with rail, they go together, right? I mean, if we were able to restore that Pioneer line, that helps Valley Regional Transit and the local opportunities here in Boise, in the Valley, for commuters coming into Boise State, or if you're talking about the College of Western Idaho. I mean, I went to undergrad at Utah, and light rail was pretty new at the time, from the 2002 Salt Lake Olympics. I lived downtown Salt Lake City, and I commuted up to the U and back and rode that light rail and utilized that, right? And so I think those outgrowths come from building those opportunities, and you have to use best practices from the other states and then hone in on what works best.
I'll say it before is that I'm really excited about what we did in our last transportation package about making young people 18 and younger able to ride the train for free, right? Because we're all impacted by our experiences when we're young, right? But but it's not necessarily happening for young people today to be familiar with rail and what that would offer them. And hopefully that next generation I believe will be more environmentally conscious if they're exposed to rail, then they'll take a liking to it and be the advocates in the future for more and more enhancements to passenger rail.
Great. I think we have time for one more in the very back. Great. So talking about how can we work to address sort of transportation needs of more rural communities? How are we partnering with urban transit centers, short line rail providers, trying to maybe partner and address kind of the multimodal needs folks have in other parts of our states?
So I think that's along the same lines of kind of my prior answer. I mean, I think the opportunities, at least in Idaho specifically, if we have a east-west route along the southern half of our state, the opportunities to come off north and south and to kind of pick up some of those rural communities. I mean, you're right. I mean, there are some opportunities and some that are already existing. You just have to invest in them and get them up to par. So I think that's right. But I think there's some preliminary things that have to happen before you can just immediately tap into those. You have to have the longer term routes established.
I think too, going back to the question about the Pioneer, the I-84 corridor out of Portland east and into Northeast Oregon, down into Ontario and Boise, there are a lot of people that could be served by the train that currently aren't. And there's no air service in many of those communities. The buses like Greyhound and all of that have withdrawn from many of those locations. I do think ODOT's matching bus service helps some with that. So that's, we do have a pretty good system between both trains and buses, but there's more. And we just had a bill passed that actually got some funding. I laugh because Ways and Means is the place where lots of good bills go to die. But don't tell the chair that I said that. But we just passed a bill asking for, I think it's $250,000 to study the short lines, Portland and Western, that go down the western portion of the valley to possibly provide passenger service between Portland and Salem. So that would be something else that we hopefully it'll actually come to fruition. But yeah, there's things that we definitely need to do. And we really, it's not just the environmental question, it's the equity question. What happens to a lot of the poor people in rural communities who really have no other way to get around, especially if they don't drive or, they've gotten older and they don't drive very well.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. If you could please join me in thanking our panelists for today's conversation. And we're going to take a 15-ish minute break. We should be back here around 10:45 for our next panel. Thank you, everyone.